Welcome to Keiser Voices, the story of success, brought to you by Keiser University Graduate School, here where the academic world meets personal triumph. Join us today as we dive into the captivating tales of success.
Hi, my name is Heather Cordner. I'm the Director of Student Services at Keiser University's eCampus. I'm also a Keiser University Graduate School alumni, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the essence of leadership. We spend a lot of time talking about definitions of leadership, difference between styles of leadership, differences between a leader and a manager, and we're going to kind of talk a little bit about all of those, but also kind of incorporating it from a growth perspective. How does that change? What does that look like today and in the future? Pulling on experiences, because honestly, I think the place that you learn the most about leadership is from experience, whether that's good, bad, different, watching somebody else, or as you fail and make mistakes, because that's part of life. Leadership kind of evolves, and there's no standard definition. Ogden and Harris in 2000 published an article in which they discussed leadership, and they define leadership much like most of us do. It's seen as an individual capable of inspiring the vision of the future, inspiring, directing, and supporting others to achieve a particular vision or particular goal. Nothing new about that definition, kind of reinforces what we've learned since grade school, and continue to learn as we move into higher education. I had multiple classes in my master's program talking about leadership, about management, and we constantly define it. But I always like hearing about what other people's definitions are. It looks different to everyone. There's no one definition to leadership from my experience, because it's based on that person that you're looking at, that you're trying to emulate, or who is becoming a mentor, or who has inspired you to make a difference. I got to be part of a leadership seminar a few weeks ago with a lot of my students, in which they had to define how they see leadership. We often say that leaders have this certain key to their personality, this charismaticness to them that sets them apart, that makes them easy to follow, easy to listen to, easy to let them be an example for us. Before we really get to talk about those essence of skills that make up a leadership, it is important to talk about the leadership styles. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time defining leadership, because again, I think that's something that we constantly talk about. It comes up all the time. Whether you're in school or you're looking to improve yourself as a leader, we know that there are multiple types. There's aristocratic, democratic, and laissez-faire. With the aristocratic often being that authoritarian dictatorship feeling to the leadership style. Democratic is more of that participative, where we're listening to others, and the free reign or the laissez-faire kind of gives people room to do as they please. From experience, no one leadership style is necessarily better or the best to choose from. I've found from my studies, in reading other students' published articles, dissertations, there's so many published stories, journals, you name it, on leadership styles, and executing them, that it seems that there's really no one style. A good leader knows when to move through all three leadership styles to ensure that they're being the best leader that they can be, and hopefully that's their goal. Like a lot of people, I never set out to be a leader, and I still don't know that I would define myself as a leader. I started out undergrad studying criminal justice and sociology at Teal College, which is in northern Pennsylvania, where I'm originally from. And at the time, I had thought to myself, I'd like to make a difference. I'm pulling on stories from my background, from my growing up, that I felt that this was the path I needed to take. And then everything changed. I had one class, that one professor that stood out, and I ended up taking this class called victimology, got to work with a couple of local organizations, and my perspective on leadership and my perspective on what my goals were completely changed. I felt that there was never enough we could do for other people, and if you have the opportunity, you should take advantage of that. Moved to Florida, started out at Keiser University as an associate bursar, was promoted to Associate Director of Student Services and promoted again to Director of Student Services a few years ago. And it's been a journey of learning, of understanding, of changing, of finding that balance between being a manager and leader, which is another common debate. And I think I'm still working on that. I'm still looking to see how I define that, because at the end of the day, my style is based on my perspective and how I'm defining it. A lot of leaders from the past, from the future, and even today, they're constantly looking at how to redefine themselves, how to define themselves based on the changes that they're being faced, changes in diversity, changes in the economy. I mean, COVID really shook up a lot of the way that we do and look at things, and causing a whole new perspective. From before, online was always available as an opportunity to work and to go to school that way, but it didn't gain that notice until COVID hit. And then here we have to pivot. And that's when a leader really comes into play. It's conquering those challenges and allowing other people to be able to comfortably follow. I don't know that any one person is comfortable with change, but when there is change, you look to a leader to help guide you. I recently read an article that was published in the European Management Journal by Marlene Walk, and she talks about how often we don't see leaders execute the change, but more so incite the change. And I think that's a important distinction. And maybe that's where we're falling short with some of the leaders when they're not standing out the way that we want them to. When does it become that leader's role to initiate the change versus executing it? And that kind of takes us back to the definition of a leader versus a manager, which is often brought up in almost any course that you're going to take, is that true definition between the two. We often talk about how managers are more focused on organizational goals. And that's really how the difference comes in. They tell you what to do. They don't necessarily listen to other people. They focus on the work versus the people. They often do have a plan and a purpose, but if you've ever listened to Simon Sinek talk about managers and leaders, we know that that's just not enough, right? Not every person who is a manager is a leader, and not every leader is a manager. I definitely agree with a lot of that opinion. You don't have to be in a management position, like I find myself, to be a good leader. It's in what you're doing and how you're influencing others, which kind of goes back to that definition that we initially talked about as what is leadership? Someone who is influencing others, hopefully for good, but it's that person that's leading that influence, leading that change. They're not just executing it, but they're initiating it. And that's where, again, I feel that we're finding a lot of the challenges today, and it's overcoming that and paying attention to what we're seeing in the news, what we're seeing mainstreaming, to overcome obstacles and overcome diversity and to move forward, to make sure that we're being effective. Leadership is about making others feel safe. And it's not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those that we're in charge of. And that's really where we find the difference between a manager and a leader, and what we should be more so working towards than necessarily that title. I mean, I'm very much proud of my accomplishments, having been promoted, but just because I was promoted doesn't mean I necessarily possess the skills to be a leader. It means I possess the skills and knowledge of the department to allow me to turn into a manager. So it becomes my problem, and if you will, and future managers' problem, to understand where leadership comes in and how being a leader and not just a manager is going to make a difference in what they're trying to accomplish. The people that they're in charge of, the people that they're trying to influence, the people that they're trying to help. One of the things that's at the core of a leader, in my eyes, is that unwillingness to accept no when it comes to helping, when it comes to making a difference. It is so hard to be able to settle for being told, no, you can't. I just always want to do more. And leaders truly do want to do more and do better. And that's when it really kind of becomes important to understand the role that knowledge plays with leadership. So let's talk a little bit more about knowledge when it comes to being a leader, because I think that's important. Knowledge is so important. You need to keep learning. Remember hearing a quote, and years ago, and I couldn't even tell you who said it. It might have been a very old quote or a quote at the time, but I remember hearing a quote that stated that you should always keep wanting to learn. You should continue to learn. The moment that you stop learning, you're dead. And as harsh as that quote was, I think it's very relevant. We should always strive to learn from our experiences. And it takes us back to what I said, knowledge is a key to leadership. You need to know when to ask questions. You need to know the people around you. You need to know that you don't always have all the answers. You need to know yourself. You need to know that you are enough, know that you aren't perfect. And a title doesn't make somebody a leader. And knowing this can help you look at the important skills that it takes to be a successful leader, if that's what you're looking to do or to become or to improve on. I always feel I'm looking to improve, to do better, to do more. And I do it through continuing to learn, continue to read articles on leadership or look back at history and the bad examples of leaders so that I can improve, that I can do more, that I can do better. It's all about the perspective when it comes to being a good leader, understanding the role emotional intelligence plays, which I think we're hearing more about the definition of emotional intelligence since COVID, to be perfectly honest with you, than we did before. And I think through understanding that we need to lead with empathy and encourage our teams, if you are somebody who is maybe a manager holding a titled position, that we need to encourage our teams. We need to inspire them. It's all well and good to have a goal or an objective in mind, but if it's just you leading the charge and you're falling flat from what everybody else around you needs, how effective are you being? Are you actually being a leader at that time, or are you back to just being a manager where you're making the shot or making the calls, calling all the shots, telling other people what they're going to do instead of having that conversation of support? And the other big key to being a great leader is also inspiration. To inspire a call to action as opposed to telling people that action. Those probably are the two biggest keys to being a great leader after knowledge. And together, by focusing all three of them, you can truly expand your horizon. Leaders aren't afraid to take risks, and I think that comes from that understanding of what emotional intelligence means and being able to make those tough decisions to be able to inspire the people around you. It's not an easy path, and sometimes it can be lonely. Take a look at a lot of great examples from history. I mean, we've seen many leaders walking by themselves to try to make a difference before people are comfortable enough to follow them, because it takes that risk, it takes jumping in, it takes them showing how. One of the things I always pride myself on is that I don't just talk the walk. I'm going to do the work right alongside the rest of the team, the rest of the department. We all have a role that we play in helping our students transition from students to alumni and heading out into the workforce. And it doesn't come from me sitting in my office telling them what to do. It comes from working hand in hand over our collective goal and trying to find a way to inspire them to remember our ultimate goal is to help other people, whether it be the community, our students, our alumni. It's not an individual task, it's a shared task, and kind of makes you wonder how they've ever come up with the leadership style of authoritarianism, because we see what happens when it's a pure dictatorship versus working together and providing influence and being mindful of the people following you. I've mentioned a few times about a manager versus a leader, and I keep circling back to that because it's also important to understand that not every leader is a manager, and that's important too. Sometimes it's that person on a team or that person that's part of an organization maybe doesn't have a title for whatever reason. Maybe they don't aspire to have a title, but they're still leading the charge. They still are inspiring those around them, motivating them, encouraging them, celebrating them to do better. And that's okay. That's fine. You don't have to have that title. I think we all get so stuck in our heads that to be a good leader, you have to have the title and you should work your way through until you hold that top position, but that's not always necessarily true to bring about change or to inspire others. I'm sure it goes a long way, right? We hear somebody is a manager, a director, a supervisor, and that kind of gives you the little like, oh, they must know what they're talking about, but that's not always the case. I can think back through my career, through the years that I have grown as an individual and certainly into a director's position, that I've seen good managers, I've seen bad managers, I've seen true leaders, and I've seen people who thought that they were leaders but were misusing power. And it's going to happen. I'd like to think I've seen better examples than I've seen of those bad examples. But I've certainly seen those who just boss people around, right? I guess they're the boss, but they just boss people around with no empathy, with no feeling towards the way that they're coming across, with the way that they talk to people. And I've also seen people who inspire, encourage, and motivate those around them to do better and to be proud of what they're doing. And I think at some point, everyone's going to have that. We're all going to have that example of a leader or manager in our life, just like we're all going to hopefully have a good example of what that means too, because it's also part of your perspective and a part of how you define what your leadership style is and what you are as a leader. It comes from the world around you. It's not just singular. It's not just about your education. It goes back to what I said about experience, good, bad, or indifferent. You can take a lot away from them. And you should always be striving to learn. You can learn from each experience, what not to do, what you could have done better, and make sure that you're celebrating your failures, because you learn from that. And it goes back to knowledge. I keep circling back almost to the point of repetition, to the idea of knowledge and emotional intelligence and inspiration, because that's truly what makes up a great leader. We also talk about that courage, that bravery to inspire that change, not to just execute, but to innovate and to honestly lead by example. One of the great things that we offer to students at Keiser University is our Leadership Distinction Program, and I am excited to almost always be a participant on it. I might be the host and getting to introduce some amazing guest speakers, but there's so much to take away from listening to these different individuals who have their own specialties and their own expertise in their own right, for that opportunity to learn from them and to hear from them and to hear other people's perspectives. Don't know that I would fully define myself as a leader. I do strive to be one and be more than just a manager or a person with a title. But when I'm facing challenges, especially pre and post COVID, the only way for me to navigate them or to move past them or to handle those challenges with any kind of grace is being open, being able to listen, going back to that element of knowledge, knowing that I don't have all the answers. And you have to learn. You have to learn from your failures to move forward. And so my tip, I think, would be for anyone who's looking to become a better leader or learn more about leadership or to achieve to be a leader, is to start with knowing that you don't know everything. And you're going to make mistakes. You're not perfect. Like I said before, you need to know when to ask questions, when to ask for help, know when to speak and to do so appropriately. And there are going to be failures along the way, and talk a little bit about failures at the beginning, because we all are going to make mistakes. You are going to fall, and it's about getting up. And maybe the path you were initially taking isn't going to work out, and you need to pivot and you need to move on to that next path. And that's when the true traits of leader will kick in, because you're going to have the courage and you're going to be able to take that breath and make those hard choices to move forward. And others will follow, not just because you maybe have a title, but they're going to follow because of who you are, what you're looking to accomplish. your ability to connect with other people, to have a conversation, to listen. It's funny, I have a 6-year-old and I always tell him to turn his active listening ears on, right? So in the morning he goes to school, I say, put your listening ears on. But you know what? We should be saying that to each other, even as adults. Put your listening ears on, put your active listening ears on. So that way you can hear what those around you are saying. Because how else are you going to gain insight, perspective to be able to make the changes, to be able to support the strengths and relationships of those around you if you're not listening? And I think that by understanding what the essence of leadership is, and again, we've talked mostly today about my definition of the essence of leadership. I can say all the terms again. I think we start looking at what truly makes up a leader and not just assuming that our textbook definitions of leadership is enough. Because again, we can define it all day long, but it comes through the actions, right? Actually putting it to action, taking it from this concept into something real and tangible. And that's what I challenge you with, is define leadership to you. Work on gaining that knowledge. Learn about empathy. Stop being so afraid of taking risks and not challenging the status quo, or we may never achieve being a leader, right? We're always just going to be a manager. And to some, that's not enough, but to somebody who's truly being a leader, whether by nature or by nurture, that'll never be enough to be a manager. It comes from something deeper within oneself, knowing that there's a greater good out there and that they can do more and that they can do better. So I challenge you. How do you define leadership?
Thank you for journeying with us today on Keiser Voices, the Story of Success. As we close this chapter, remember, every story has its next page. Join us every Tuesday for more enlightening tales and academic insights.